had a big year in 1969. He became an atheist, an anarchist, an anti-vivisectionist, and he stopped attending the Catholic Church. Something like that. He was also a student of Stephen Jay Gould a few years later. So here we have a really creative fellow who, like Charles Darwin, lives in the middle of the country with his partner and their son, and enjoys watching the wildlife, and doesn't see people very often. And I admire him greatly for this. We saw each other fairly frequently before he left for the country, writing Darwin's biography. It's just called Darwin. And in writing Darwin's Sacred Cause, which was published last year, we saw each other twice, I think, thanks to modern technology. This book was co-written by sending 3.5-inch discs back and forth in the post and making lots of phone calls. I don't know how we wrote it that way. This was done by obvious reasons, by obvious ways. I came to write about Darwin from a most unlikely background. Both of my grandfathers were fundamentalist preachers. My mother's father was a Baptist from Texas, real fire-breathing, flag-waving American, and my father's father was from Northern Ireland, a congregational minister who did a very Elmer Gantry sort of thing at almost precisely the same time that Sinclair Lewis published Elmer Gantry in 1927. So I never knew him, but I was brought up by their children, and I was given a dose of anti-Darwin and anti-evolution, amongst other things. And to escape all of that, I became an intellectual refugee from Richard Nixon's New American Majority in 1972, and went to Britain on a Marshall Scholarship. And after 3 years at Manchester University, I wrote a thesis. Only at Manchester could you write a 900-page thesis in 2 volumes. You know, Oxford and Cambridge required discipline. I only finished 2/3 of the thesis too, and I ran out of time. I did it in 2.5 years. But the book got published. It was my first book. And it was about lots of things besides Darwin, but Darwin came in at the end. And ever since then, it's just kind of been Darwin, Darwin, Darwin. And you might say I'm a one-trick pony. That might be true. But Darwin is a very big trick. And between us, Adrian and I had about 40 man-years background and poured into this 800-page book, which we wrote in 16 months with a gun at our heads. That was in 1991 it was published, and it's now in 12 languages. The one we're most proud of is the Russian pirate translation. Only 2 people have seen, but it's come out last year at Shanghai in Mandarin, and it's about to come out in Turkish, of all things. So it's changed the way a lot of people think about Darwin. I came to write that book because I was dealing with issues from my past, because that book was needed, and I've been saying for years that we needed a book that people could pick up with their supermarket shopping and put in their trolley and enjoy reading. I wanted to make Darwin an illuminating as well, an entertaining as well as illuminating experience, and that the book has achieved. Sometimes I wonder that we could have written what is on some of those pages. You'll have to check that out for yourself. I had to write that book to save myself from bankruptcy. My life kind of went smash for various reasons, and I found myself homeless and then in a house with a mortgage I couldn't afford in the year 1988. And I was on the point of selling my car, and then I would start selling my books to keep from going bankrupt. And my dear friend John C. Green, Ned's father, had been corresponding with me about my ups and downs. He knew that I wanted to write about Darwin, and out of the blue, he didn't know what my circumstances were at that moment. I received a check for $2,500, and that saved my car, and it saved my library, and it enabled me to go ahead and write this biography with Darwin, with Adrian Desmond. And the royalties we received from that covered the financial mess I was in. And it was that critical moment in the summer of 1988 that John, whom I had corresponded with, Ned's father, since 1977 as a professional colleague, really made it was a necessary condition for bringing that Darwin biography into existence. And as gratitude to him for many things, I edited what the Germans call a Festschrift, an honorary volume of essays by my peers of a younger generation. John Green was born in 1917. Most of us were born much later. It's called History, Humanity, and Evolution, Essays for John C. Green, 1989. And people have said it's the best collection of essays on evolution ever published. And there have been a lot of collections of essays on evolution. And it's a testimony, really, to what Roy Porter in the first essay calls the majestic achievement, which John Green pulled off in 1959 on the Darwin and the centenary of the origin of species in his book, The Death of Adam, Evolution and Its Impact on Western Thought. John was a classical historian of ideas, trained at Harvard, and a consummate master of modern intellectual history. And all of that was poured into the book for which, more than any other, he will be remembered, The Death of Adam, Evolution and Its Impact on Western Thought. And if you're interested sometime, there's a long conversation, which I interviewed John for 6 hours one summer, and we distilled a section, probably a sampling of the whole thing, in our introductory conversation, which ranges over John's experience at Harvard between the wars, his experience during the Second World War, the birth of his children, all the usual things, and something about his own convictions as a practitioner of history, brought up in a liberal Christian tradition. So, I'm about to write an éloge for John to be published in the world's foremost history of science journal, ISIS. And I'm here this weekend partly to talk with Ned about some of the things that should go in it. But I do want to say that there are many people in the profession, some older than me, some younger, who will continue to remember John and have contributed to the éloge I'm writing. Darwin's Sacred Cause, and I said I would only talk about 5 minutes, is
Jim,
so, yeah?
can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Before you move on to your next great project, I would like to raise a toast to the memory of Ned Stack.
Yes.
Oh. Stay on the bus to him. Miss him.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
John, you're here.
To John.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. That was well spotted. Thank you for that. Yes, John was like a father to me. I could go on and on about this. I have to be careful. I can't write this in an éloge. My father, I told you, was brought up in a family, a very fundamentalist family, but he never really knew his father because of the old McGantry incident. And he had trouble bringing me up in the 60s and 70s, and more or less rejected me because of various attitudes I took up. You know, for example, I did something really radical. I opposed the Vietnam War. Then I went to Europe. Then I went to, socialist Britain. I was asked, what's it like living in a totalitarian socialist state? This was under Edward Heath, the Tories. Just hallucinogen. Anyhow, it was a Tory. Right, but John was everything my father constitutionally and historically couldn't be. He was liberal, he was accepting, he was open. John was really conservative in many ways, I think. He and I disagreed about history of ideas, we disagreed about Marxism, we disagreed to a certain extent about the state of the world, but he was a New Deal liberal. He liked Roosevelt. My family hated Roosevelt, always voted Republican, and Nixon and everything else. So John offered me a lot of comfort and support when my family couldn't believe in what I was doing. So all of that, follow the toast. This is a sort of prequel to the Darwin biography. That makes it kind of, Star Wars 2 or something, Well, the third volume hasn't come. There is a kind of trilogy here, but that would have to be the first volume. The Darwin biography tells a story of how a respectable, wealthy English gentleman with a terrible secret, a terrible burden, his theory of evolution, picked his way through a menacing world to end up buried in Westminster Abbey, paradoxically. But the question we didn't answer in that book was, why in hell did he do it? He had everything to lose. He had his reputation. The family had their reputation. He had his money to lose. Professionally, it was not on. It was not cool to be an evolutionist. It wasn't certainly cool to tell anybody about it. Why did he take the risk? Why did he go out on a limb? Pardon?
He had the courage of his convictions.
Yes, that's the traditional answer. He had the courage of his convictions. But courage comes from somewhere. Courage doesn't just, it's not something we have like, I don't know, taste. And the short answer is that Darwin cared passionately about something mentioned in the subtitle of The Origin of Species. Remember, the subtitle of The Origin of Species is, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. And everybody says the races there, oh, they're pigeon races, they're races of domestic animals. But the central moral question of Darwin's day, by analogy with the 60s and 50s, you'd say nuclear disarmament. In Darwin's day, it was much, much, much bigger. It was the abolition, firstly, of the slave trade, and then of Darwin's sacred cause, how a hatred of slavery shaped Darwin's views on human evolution. And there's lots of good pictures in it, and it's out in paperback in the UK. It has not done well in this country for reasons that were beyond our control. And University of Chicago Press will publish it next year, I believe. So I still think you should start with Star Wars 1. I think you need to see feel the story of this man's life. Warts and all, blood and guts, it's all there.